As this is a series where the second game is actually the fourth one, you wouldn't be mistaken in thinking that the beloved Marvel vs. Capcom franchise is a bit convoluted. With so many characters, stages, pieces of music, etc., these games have a lot to offer. But for this video specifically, I'm really interested in what didn't make it into the final versions of these games. That's right, we're talking about cut content. A while ago, I made a video about cut content in the Street Fighter 3 series, and I thought it would be fun to apply that same format to the Marvel vs. Capcom games. From 1994's Children of the Atom to 2011's Marvel vs. Capcom 3, I'll be exploring pretty much everything that never made their way into the final versions of these games, with the exception of Marvel Infinite. The only thing that I could find for this game is that it was supposedly meant to have at least 60 characters, but there's no concrete information online regarding who these characters were, so I decided not to dedicate a section to the game. Also, some games have more cut content than others, so if a certain game feels shorter than the others, it's just because I couldn't find a whole lot of information about that game's cut content. Finally, my source will be the Cutting Room Floor website, as it contains lots of information about hidden content found in the files of these games. If you want to learn more about your favorite games, I highly recommend checking this website out, and I couldn't have made this video without it. But enough about all that, you get the point by now. So let's begin by jumping into Children of the Atom. First released in 1994, X-Men Children of the Atom doesn't have a whole lot of cut content, although there are a lot of differences between versions 1.0 and 2.0 of the arcade ROM. In 2.0, some stages have more background NPCs, Akuma's sprite was made black with the hint box being removed when he loses, and Anne-Marie Cortez no longer grabs Magneto's crotch in the ending of the game. There are plenty of other differences between the two versions of the game, but they don't fall into the category of cut content, so we'll move on. Speaking of Anne-Marie Cortez, she has two unused sprites in the game files that depict her leaning against Magneto. It's theorized on the Cutting Room Floor website that these sprites would appear when she goes to help him up during the game's ending, but they go unused. More interestingly, there's also an animation of Colossus enjoying some painting, and a small painting cap, which I think is a beret, can be seen to the right of Colossus. The picture he's painting is off the X-Men side of the character roster, with Professor X being in the middle instead of Colossus himself. I'm not 100% sure what this could be in relation to in the game, but the Cutting Room Floor website mentions that there was going to be a part in the game where, at the end, the player could choose to either join or reject Magneto in his quest for domination, so this painting may have tied into this choice. If you rejected Magneto, maybe Colossus would have a happy ending and he just did some painting or something, I'm not really sure. But if you were to join Magneto instead, the following cut text would appear. I have lost too many of my loved ones to Xavier's failed dream. I will try yours. I chose to follow Magneto because I cannot forgive the humans for killing father and mother, but did I really make the right choice? As Children of the Atom is loosely based on the Fatal Attraction storyline from the 90s, Colossus leaving the X-Men to join Magneto's Brotherhood would have been accurate to the comics at the time. I can't get into a detailed recap of why this happens in Fatal Attractions, but it does give new insight into Colossus' character, and it actually made me feel bad for the poor guy, so I recommend reading it. Anyway, it's a shame to say this, but that's really all I could find regarding cut content for the game. There's information online about certain characters that were considered for the game, like Gambit for example, but these characters were never developed, so I can't honestly claim that they were cut. Children of the Atom was a really solid first attempt at an X-Men fighting game from Capcom, and they used the experience they gained from working on this game to develop their next Marvel-related title. If you thought that Children of the Atom didn't have a lot of cut content, then you'll be blown away by Marvel superheroes. Released in 1995, this game expanded the Marvel side of the character roster to include popular icons like Spider-Man, Iron Man, Captain America, and the Hulk for example, and it also introduced the iconic Infinity Gems into the world of fighting games. This game only has a few unused sprites and text in the game files, and even though I searched high and low, I wasn't able to find anything super big or exciting that was cut from the final game. In the files, there are unused color palettes from Dr. Doom and Thanos. As these guys are the boss characters and they cannot be used in regular versus mode in the arcade version, these palettes go unused. They are found in the game's home ports to the Sega Saturn and the PlayStation though, but not in the arcade version. Also, when you pick up and activate one of the Infinity Gems, you can see which one you're using because of the text that pops up, and a very early version of this text is still present in the game files. These words are a lot less colorful than the text found in the final version of the game, and I think the basic font and the color scheme could have made it hard to read over the game's busy backgrounds. Finally, if you were to defeat your opponent while using a gem, a message reading Gem Victory would appear, but no such thing happens in the final game. I'm really unsure as to why this was cut though. I mean, it'd make perfect sense for this message to appear given the context of the game, but I don't know. I guess Capcom didn't see the point in having this text appear. Much like with Children of the Atom, it's a major shame that this game too also doesn't have a lot of cut content, but the same can't be said for the next game. Moving on to 1997's Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter, this game has a lot of cut content. Like, seriously, a lot. I can't even get into all of it in this video. Let's begin with who I honestly believe is my spirit animal, Norimaru. In this old video released for Norimaru's likeness, real-life comedian Noritake Kanashi travels to the Capcom offices to see the character for the first time. There are plenty of differences compared to Norimaru in the final game. There's a lot to cover here, so I'm just going to read out what the cutting room floor lists as being different. Norimaru is not named in-game. This is because his name was chosen in a male contest shown earlier in the video. However, the name Norio appears when he wins. Some of his moves are slightly different, as he doesn't fall after his quarter-circle floating kick move. Further, his hyper-strong Miracle Treasure hyper combo has him throwing stuff in an arc rather than throwing it randomly, and he doesn't taunt after ending the move. Infamously, he has a throw that was removed from the final version where he shoves his fingers up the opponent's rear, a Japanese prank called Kancho. Despite the staff loving the idea, this move was supposedly removed at Marvel's request. His Ultra Variety Private Memories hyper combo doesn't have the pose at the beginning or at the end of the move, but it has a lot of different animations. It's hard to notice them due to the video quality, but instead of sitting in a bathtub, he was sitting on a stool while washing himself. He was dressed as Kamen No Rider, Noritake Kanashi's Kamen Rider parody, instead of Mega Man. The frame where he's cooking breakfast had him naked except for the apron, and there's a completely removed frame where he seems to be wearing a schoolgirl outfit. Norimaru also has unused sprites of him fantasizing about various characters like Chun-Li, Cammy, Zangief, etc., so you know, the usual suspects. Believe it or not, but there are actually even more differences between pre-release and final Norimaru, but I simply don't have the time to include them all, and I think you get the point by now. Moving on, if you change a value in the game files that let you play as Cyber Akuma, finishing arcade mode will display this screen instead of a normal character ending. This is believed to be a leftover from the game's Japanese location tests, and I think this theory checks out. There's also a sprite of Sakura's body and Karin's head put together, and this was made before Karin's video game debut in 1998 with Street Fighter Alpha 3. This sprite only has this one idle animation, and its location in the game's ROM indicates that it was meant to be seen in a cutscene. Dawson's wife Sally was also meant to make an appearance in the game, as well as Sakura's fireball from Street Fighter Alpha 2. An even cooler unused sprite involves the final boss, Apocalypse. He was meant to have an attack where his hand would turn into a pincer, and he'd try and use it to push the enemy away from him. Blackheart also had a super plan where he would summon Mephisto to grab the enemy and breathe fire on them, but this was never finished as indicated by the weird looking flame sprite. Moving on to cut audio now, there are a few cut lines of speech. The announcer was meant to indicate when someone lost, when a variable attack or crossover attack happened, and also to be surprised at Dan, interestingly enough.
Lose! Crossover attack! Dan?
Omega Red's old voice lines for his Omega Destroyer and Omega Strike special moves are still in the game, and compared to their new ones, they don't sound as cool in my opinion.
Omega Strike! Omega Strike! Omega Destroyer! Omega Destroyer!
He also has two lines that are brand new yet go unused.
Never. Your life force stinks.
While there are other differences between the Japanese and the Western versions thanks to Norimaru, I've covered the bulk of what was cut from the game. The thing about all this that interests me the most, however, is the announcer being confused about Dan, and I'd love to know why he sounds so confused. Anyway, let's move on to the game's direct sequel. As the first game in the series to utilize the Marvel vs. Capcom name, 1998's Clash of Superheroes, or more commonly known as Marvel vs. Capcom 1, is the final game in the series to run on the CPS2 arcade board. Much like the previous game with Cyber Akuma, if you modify the game to play as Onslaught, the final boss, and then you beat the game, this screen appears. It's from another location test, and I've gotta say, this is possibly the coolest piece of art from the game. I need this on a shirt or something. More unused images include text from Marvel superheroes, including a typo in the word Marvelous, and an early version of the assist character header. In the final game it says special partner, but I quite like how buddy character sounds too. Speaking of buddy characters, Tomi-Chin was supposed to be in the game. He's a stylized depiction of one of the game's designers, and he has sprites for punching the opponent as well as hitting them with his giant nose. There's actually some official artwork that utilizes Tomi-Chin to advertise Marvel superheroes vs. Street Fighter. Hang on a moment, just bear with me, but I think he has a move list. Does that mean he was supposed to be playable? I mean, Tomi-Chin looks super weird, but I honestly kind of think he'd fit right in if they gave him some funny moves and made him a joke character. More unused sprites in the game include a Mega Man 10th Anniversary logo. This was supposed to be part of his victory poses, and his head would fit inside of the Zero. The colors look a little bit weird, and no one has found an English version that says Mega Man instead of Rockman, so this was probably scrapped early on. There's also an icon for a random select option on the character select screen, as well as this little kid who would have been in the bathhouse stage. Sakura also makes a cameo appearance in the back of the stage, and although she constantly repeats her fist pump animation in the final game, the original plan, as you can see, was to have her towel nearly fall off. Her friend would then look on in horror as this happened, but both of these animations aren't in the final game. Moving on to audio now, the following lines are in the final game's files, but they can't be accessed normally.
Coming soon. Thank you for playing. Tomi-chin.
We meet at last. You shall be the first to fall.
There are also some lines that are in the Asian versions of the game, but not in the Japanese version specifically, and there's also a win pose that involves Morrigan doing something interesting that's exclusive to the Japanese version. The cutting room floor states that the voice lines you just heard were possibly removed over South Korea's law on Japanese speech at the time. I can't get into it properly because if I did we'd be here all year, but if you're like me and you enjoy learning a bit about history, look up South Korea's Anti-National Behavior Punishment Act of 1945, say that 5 times fast. Anyway, enough about real-world historical details, let's move on to the next game. As quite possibly the most famous crossover fighting game of all time, it pains me to say that I wasn't able to find much cut content belonging to Marvel vs. Capcom 2, but I was able to find some things. For starters, the game's final boss, Abyss, has an unused animation of him reeling back in pain and then moving backwards. The starting portion of this animation is in the final game, but it quickly cuts to another animation of him falling over and disintegrating, meaning that this walking part goes fully unused. In the Japanese release of the game's arcade version, you were able to plug in your VMU, this little device that lets you save games on the Dreamcast, into the machine to unlock secret content found in the home console release, but this entire system was scrapped for the international revisions of the game. If you've ever played a Western version of Marvel vs. Capcom 2 before, you'll know that in order to unlock bonus content, you need to spend your in-game points in the Secret Factor, a menu that lets you browse and purchase said content. This system is very simple, but it's a lot more complicated in the Japanese game. In that version, you earn multiple kinds of points by participating in different activities, like playing offline, playing online, plugging your VMU into the arcade cabinet, etc., and that's how you unlock new content. Since this multi-point system was revamped and heavily simplified for the Western release of the game, there was no point in having VMU support anymore, so it was taken out of the game when it was released outside of Japan. Speaking of the Japanese version of the game, what we know as an air combo is actually called an aerial rave over there, and there's a voice line for this term that goes unused in the Western version's files.
Aerial rave.
This audio is heard in the Japanese release, but never in other versions. Moving on to artwork now, there are also some scrap designs for Amingo, one of the newcomers in the game. Compared to his final appearance, this early design here strikes me as being very alien and Amingo looks kind of intimidating. We can also see a little sketch in the bottom corner where Amingo was supposed to use a blowpipe to shoot the enemy, and it also looks like he could summon something from the sun at one point. The design on the left, however, looks very much like the Amingo we know in the final game, although his eyes are very small here. Another image involves Dr. Doom shooting out what looks to be Cable's Hyper Viper Beam Super. During my research, I found a developer interview from around the time of the game's release, and according to Tatsuya Nakai, the game's director, Capcom was able to add in even more content than they originally planned for the game, and that they were very happy with the final product's scope. However, one very interesting thing about this interview is how the assist system was described. Initially, it was a personality-based system. A bullish Ryu would throw a fiery Hadouken, whereas a cold-hearted Ryu would throw an icy Hadouken, for example. And from there, after a lot of trial and error coming up with something that'd be easy to intuitively understand, we came up with the system you see now. Having the assist be based on a character's, I guess, quote-unquote personality sounds pretty interesting, and while I do really love the assist system we got in Marvel 2 onwards, I really want to know more details about this personality thing. It sounds really off the wall. Anyway, let's move on to the final game of the video. Before we cover Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 specifically, let's dive into Vanilla Marvel 3 first. It's a long-known fact that Dr. Octopus and Frank West were supposed to make an appearance in this version of the game, but for many reasons, neither of them made the cut. Thanks to the efforts of modders and die-hard Marvel fans alike, some footage from an early build of Vanilla has been leaked online. In this early build of the game, we can not only see a cut stage that has a massive Chun-Li statue in the background, but we can also see character portraits for Dr. Octopus and Frank, as well as Doc Ock's character portrait silhouette. It's also been stated that Dr. Octopus even had a finished theme song, but this hasn't been made public, so I can't include it. What I can include, however, is a portion of the theme tune that would have accompanied the cut stage based on Okami. Take a listen. Yeah, pretty cool, right? Also, on Marvel's official YouTube channel, we can see videos that contain pre-release footage of the game, and this footage is super early. I can't cover every single gameplay difference in this video, but if you know anything about the final game, you can tell that certain moves here do look and kind of behave differently. The biggest difference, in my opinion at least, is that performing a TAC break would automatically start an air combo off your own in this build of the game. The cutting room floor also lists the following audio as being in Vanilla's files, but I can't find any other evidence to verify this.
Doctor Strange, let this be our final battle!
Doctor Strange was one of the newcomers in Ultimate, so I'm not sure why this audio is in Vanilla. That's about all I could find for Vanilla Marvel 3, so let's move on to Ultimate now. The biggest thing, and I'm sure that you all know about this already, is that there were tens, if not hundreds of characters considered for the game that just never made it in. For the sake of clarity, I'd like to make two categories here. The first category belongs to characters like Venom, The Thing, and Fo Lu. These guys were considered for the game, but they never had any development done, so I won't consider them as being cut content. Dr. Octopus, Gil, and Emma Frost, for example, all belong to the second category, as they had work done on them by Capcom, but they were removed. Speaking of Gil, he actually had a lot of work done and he was almost complete, but the game's producer, Ryota Nitsuma, who I'm getting this information from by the way, said that Gil's really large size made him look really weird animating at the very fast speed that the game runs at. Capcom also didn't want too many Street Fighter characters, so he was cut and he was replaced with Nemesis. Not much is known about Emma Frost, but it's been stated that Marvel requested Phoenix instead, so that's how Jean Grey made it into the game. Other characters like Blade, Kingpin, Psylocke, Rogue, Squirrel Girl, Silver Surfer, Spiral, and even Luke Cage were all considered for the game, and it's a major shame that none of them made it in. There are many more characters that I can't mention in this video due to time constraints, so I highly recommend looking this all up for yourself because it's really interesting. Another thing that was cut early on in the game's development was certain win poses. You know how in the older games the characters would strike a cool pose after they won a match? That was planned for Marvel 3, and thanks to modder Tabs on Twitter, we can see some very early animations for these win poses. They're nowhere near close to being finished, but it's pretty cool to see them. Beautiful Joe even does his win pose from Tatsunoko vs Capcom, and I kinda find this really cool. Getting into cut audio now, the cutting room floor has a whopping 81 cut lines of audio, and as much as I'd love to, I simply can't play them all. The most important ones are lines for Frank that indicate he was supposed to have a level 3 super, a move where he could spit on the opponent, and lines that suggest his real Mega Buster super was set to make a return.
Real Mega Buster!
Morrigan also has a line where she performs the Soul Eraser, her big beam super in the older games.
Soul Eraser!
And Dormammu has some unused pre-battle lines.
I have waited millennia for a chance to destroy you. Fear me, I am the Lord of the Dark Dimension. I am Dormammu.
The other cut audio is mainly for Galactus, as he can be heard calling the names of every single character in the game, even himself, but these obviously go unused. Finally, there's also a cut mechanic in the game where if you spend a bar of meter, you can tag another character in at any point during the combo. This footage is super old and it's from the PS3 version of the game, so there's nothing I can do about the video quality, sadly. To be perfectly honest, just in my opinion, I'm really glad this feature isn't in the final game. That's all I could find for Marvel vs. Capcom 3, but I'm sure that in the depths of Capcom's basement, there lies a build of the game where you can play as Gil, Human Torch, and maybe even the dog from Silent Hill 2 if you input a secret code. If you made it all the way to the end, thanks a lot for watching. During the creation of this video, I spent a lot of time researching and writing rather than actually editing, and I hope that I was able to provide you with interesting information. I'm sure there are other forms of cut content for all the games I covered that have never been made public before, and I hope it all gets leaked one day so we can see it all for ourselves. All of these games have so many cool and inspiring features, and I'm so happy with the final versions of all of these games. Okay, I think you get the point by now, and I've been talking for a while, so I'm just gonna end it here. Thanks again for watching, I really appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next one.